Well, good morning, and thanks for the intro and handoff here, and thanks, Kurt, for a great presentation. Uh, Weather-wise, obviously, many changes have taken place here in Michigan over the last, day or two. It's the current map here this morning, looking at a very slow area of low pressure that's been with us. It seems like forever, but it's actually only the last couple days. And that low pressure system is slowly drifting south and east across Michigan here this morning. You can actually see down in the lower right here. This is the radar pic here from about 20 minutes ago, but a circular shape of light precipitation. And note, I didn't say rain because a lot of it is frozen form. The air above this system is it's below freezing. You don't only have to go a few hundred feet above the surface to get below freezing. And so most of the precipitation right now with this is falling as snow showers or as a mix. It is fortunately light in nature and will continue to be light here during most of the day, but compared to the early summer-like weather that we had during a lot of last week and even into the weekend here, big change. And temperatures here today in Michigan likely will not in the 30s north to the 40s. So much cooler. This will probably be the coolest day though overall of the next much of the next week. In terms of looking though, I want to talk about last week. And first of all, Kurt mentioned degree day totals, and that's also an important thing I think to follow up on. Mean temperatures for the past week here averaged, you can see much above normal, 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit above the long-term climate for a lot of the state. So needless to say, our degree day totals have surged. I'm going to show you a figure with that in here in just a moment. Just as importantly, we've been dealing with drier than normal conditions over much of the state and actually the region here for a lot of the growing season. Our weekly rainfall totals are depicted here in the right. Most of the state saw between an inch and a half, and that was due to that weather system that moved through last Saturday and into Sunday. You can see some spots in the Grand Rapids area and portions of western upper Michigan actually did better than that. They picked up more than 2 inches. That was the top end, but we also had areas don't have to move too far to the north and east where we saw less than half an inch. And again, that's especially an area where we have seen drier than normal conditions for a lot of certainly a lot of the late winter and early spring, continuing, something of concern. Our degree day totals, though, back to the degree day totals, we accumulated some cases more than 70 base 50 units last week. And then the seasonal totals beginning on 1 April here, the 1st of April, are on the left. I think it's more important probably to look at the departures, which are on the right. And if we look at that and we convert that into calendar time, much of the state right now is running a full 2 calendar weeks, and in some cases closer to 3 calendar weeks ahead of where we typically are at this time of the year. It's also important to remember that most of the last several growing seasons, we've actually been at or below or behind a little bit. We've had a little bit cooler start than the long-term normal, so it seems even more pronounced than that. You have to go back to 2012. That's actually the record. That's the earliest season that we've ever experienced in history in Michigan. But this growing season, in terms of percentiles, is probably up at most areas in that 10th percentile in terms of the warmest spring and warmest start. But that's put on hold, at least for right now. Soil temperatures, wanted to take a quick look at that, and Kurt mentioned this as well. They have dropped off significantly since where they were last week. In many areas, we had daytime temperatures. This is bare soil, 2-inch depth, a lot of 60s for highs, and then 50s even for lows. That's where we were last week in much of the state. They have dropped off. This is an image taken from, most of the Michigan sites here from our EnviroWeather Meso Network as of 2 p.m. These are daytime, and a lot of them have dropped back off into the 45 to 50 degree Fahrenheit range. So a full 10 degrees right now, at least in terms of how much cooling there's taken place with the recent change in weather. And I mentioned the long-term precipitation departures. This is the 90-day departure going back to the middle of January. This is expressed as in terms of a percent of normal, and you can see most of the state running somewhere between about 50 to 80% of normal in that time. And if you look at that in terms of inches, it's typically a couple of inches, but the far eastern portions, especially of lower Michigan and the eastern UP, we were probably closer to 3 or 4 inches below where we typically are. And that's just looking at the last 90 days. So much of the state still trending drier than normal. There are a couple of exceptions to that. The U.S. Drought Monitor, which of course takes into account these long-term precipitation deficits. You can see 97% of Michigan still in either D0 abnormally dry or in the D1 moderate drought category. And they have actually the D1 you can see across the southern few tiers of counties in the Lower Peninsula. I wouldn't be surprised to see some spread, especially over the northeastern lower. That right now, if I were to put a bullseye in terms of deficits, that's one of the longer term dry areas that we'll need to look at here, especially given the outlook, probably looking at more dry weather here for the next 1 to 2 weeks. So looking at the outlook, the low pressure that's right over the state right now, again, and only going to slowly move off to the east here by tomorrow morning. There will be there will be showers here today. I think by the middle of the day, most everybody will change over from, if there's frozen precip or some snow or a mix, we'll probably switch over to liquid. Nothing heavy, only light precipitation or light totals expected, but that will gradually end from west to east. And we'll have a few lingering showers or the threat of that, some showers early tomorrow morning in the far eastern part of the state. Otherwise, high pressure here, which you can see up over the prairie provinces or southern Canada here, that's going to gradually make its way towards us for the weekend and set the stage, it looks like right now, for a fairly decent, dry, but seasonably cool, maybe even a little bit below normal weekend. But we will see a little bit of a moderating trend in temperatures beginning tomorrow, highs back up into the 50s for most areas of the state, and we may approach 60 by Saturday and Sunday, but lows still remaining in the 30s. So definitely nowhere we're like where we were a week or two ago. By Saturday morning here, the map again shows high pressure off to our west, and really that's not much over our area. Most of the precipitation, the next weather system should remain to the south of Michigan, but we are looking again at generally fair and dry conditions, probably through Monday. I think the next chance for precipitation right now, later during the day on Monday, and then overnight Monday into Tuesday when a frontal boundary moves through the state. And at this point in time, it does not look like a major rain producer. It will probably just be the threat of more showers. So one of the take homes here for the outlook, it's going to be a mostly dry week. As you can see, for most of the state here, certainly less than a quarter. In many instances, it'll be less than a tenth of an inch here, total precipitation through next Thursday. So precip here today in most areas, just a couple hundredths of an inch probably, and then again early next week, and that probably will be about it for threats of rainfall. In the medium range forecast guidance, there have been some changes over certainly in the last week since we've last talked, but I want to bring your attention here to the upper air forecast for the 20th through the 24th. So looking in the next week, but if you look at this, you can still see a split flow jet stream. There's a northern branch here out of Canada into the lower 48, and then a subtropical or southern branch here out of the Pacific across southern portions of the U.S. We've had that pattern, that split flow pattern, for a lot of the winter actually. But what is I think most noteworthy here, notice the configuration here. You basically have north-northwest flow right out of the high latitudes, right out of the Arctic, southward and eastward, right down into the upper Midwest, and you can see Michigan's right in the middle of this, underneath this trough. It says one thing, and that is we're going to be unseasonably cool. As a result of that, it's essentially opening up the Arctic. It's a good thing. This is it's April and not January or February. This would be the kind of upper air situation where you would expect with fairly severe cold. But in our case now, given the time of the season, we will be looking at certainly below normal temperatures, and you can see that reflected in the outlook over here in the upper right for mean temperatures, below normal temperatures. At least one Canadian origin air mass to deal with here by the middle of next week. It looks like the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday time frame, maybe into Friday, and then probably a second one after that. But this upper air configuration is what allows the transport of that cold air southward into the lower 48. So right now, looking at the 8 to 14 day is very, very similar to this. Note also for the 6 to 10 day, drier than normal conditions forecast over much of the central and actually western U.S. as well. That changes a little bit in the 8 to 14 day outlook. There's some hints that this pattern, this upper air pattern that you see here, may begin to alter once again by the end of the month or early May. So right now, that's probably, we're looking at 2 weeks of this cooler and drier than normal type of pattern, with maybe a change by the end of the month or early May. And the hints are right now that it would be certainly milder and probably a little bit wetter than this pattern that you see right here right now. But there's a lot of confidence in what you see now for at least next week and probably a good chunk of the week following that. I mentioned at least one Canadian origin air mass. This will lead to certainly the likelihood, I would call it certainly a risk of frost and freeze conditions here once again. Right now it looks like the next week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday timeframe is when we would have to be watching for that. These are for minimum temperatures here overnight. This is on Wednesday night, Thursday. It's a little bit far out yet for this type of detail, but it's still fairly likely that we will see the threat of below freezing temperatures here at that point in time. Temperature departures down in the lower right here, much, much below where they typically are, at least 10 degrees below normal for this period. And as I just mentioned too, there's a chance there would be another cold air mass maybe by not this coming weekend, but the one following that as well. So that same pattern is going to repeat itself possibly at least once. So summarizing here, an unusually cool, unsettled day today with snow or mixed precipitation here early, probably changing or over to rain or to liquid by late morning, or certainly by the middle of the day. Highs just in the 30s or 40s, so way below where they typically are. And then beginning tomorrow, high pressure moves in, and we should see an improvement with mostly dry conditions and slow moderation in temperatures during the week. So we'll be back up into the 50s in most areas. Lows still in the 30s. Next chance for precip after today, not until probably later on Monday or Tuesday of next week. And then as you just saw, where the medium range is pretty strong and suggesting cooler and drier than normal conditions for a lot of the rest of the month here, with certainly the risk of frost and freezing temperatures by a certain middle of next week and then maybe once again after that. So right now, beyond that, the first chance, I think, for something different, maybe by the beginning of May, we would see a new pattern change. But we'll talk more about that next week, and also we'll have some new seasonal outlooks for next week. Those are released here later today, but we'll cover those next week. So that's it for me for weather, and I'll finish up here with a reminder of next week. I just mentioned that, and our speaker next week is Dr. Manny Singh, who's going to be talking about corn and soybean planting considerations. So if you can make it next week, it'll be worthwhile to hear Manny. And with that, I'll turn it back to Ricardo and or Phil.